Right, let's take a closer look at the issue of contact tracing, because it's one thing to say Victoria is in a mess, and it is, but how do you fix it? On the weekend, I wrote about this experience in 2013, 2014 that's sort of relevant. This is stopping the boats. And I think it's got a lot to do with where Victoria are at in terms of pandemic. We're talking about what we inherited back in 2013, a disconnected and complex bureaucratic structure. And in Victoria's case, plenty of ministers too, I don't think, are up to the job. And in their case particularly, a left hand that doesn't know what the right hand's doing. When we stopped the boats back then, the first thing that was done was to reorganise the structure and put in place a team with a military man at the top. And everyone reported to this military person, and then that person reported to the Prime Minister and the National Security Committee. On Monday, a senior Navy officer dispatched to Victoria to help them develop a coronavirus battle plan briefed the Prime Minister, saying that Victoria's contact tracing system isn't up to speed. And we know there's plenty of anecdotal evidence about people not getting followed up calls taking days and days, and you know, it's just not sustainable. The numbers will not improve if they can't get a handle on community transmission. Let's bring in my next guest, because he knows more about fixing these sorts of bureaucratic failures than almost anyone else I know. New South Wales Senator and retired General Jim Molan, coming to us from Canberra. Well, this is where I'm going to ask you to put your old Operation Sovereign Borders hat on. I think people really want an understanding here, Jim. We talk about bringing in the army or the military. What is it about reorganising command structures in a practical sense that makes such a difference to success in these big civilian problems as much as they do the military ones?
Peter, good evening. And you're quite right. These are just problems. They're big problems, they're complex problems, but they are just problems. And the experience that we get in the military of doing very big things and doing them often gives you both leadership and management experience. And I don't know Commodore Hill, who's gone down to Victoria. He obviously has the trust of the Prime Minister, and we've got the Chief of the Defence Force, Angus Campbell, who was the head of that group that you were describing before, the Joint Task Force. So he obviously knows what is required in these circumstances and knows that Hill is the man to go down and do it. The complexity that you and I and the Prime Minister and the Minister then for Immigration, Scott Morrison, faced was a disaster that was left to us from an approach which involved Rudd-Gillard-Rudd governments trying to solve this through a committee. They ignored Management 101, which is to find a person, a human being, put them in charge, give them authority, give them responsibility and give them the resources, and then sack them if they don't do the job. Now, you might remember that Prime Minister Abbott set the conditions for this. He fronted up all of the 16 different agencies that were working on stopping the boats, told them what was important. There was a direct line from Prime Minister Abbott through Minister Morrison down to the Joint Task Force commander. And that's what made it work. You've got to start, though, with a strategy. And I won't comment on what's going on in Victoria because our job now as a government is to assist Victoria. But you've got to start with a strategy, and that strategy is aiming to fulfil whatever the government policy is. Now, I assume that the government policy was not stop the boats, but stop the coronavirus. Now, how you do that is very, very complex. But I've got to say the kind of experience that I brought to Operation Sovereign Borders was I would do a similar strategy 3 times a week for the year I was in Iraq for the general that was commanding over there. So for us, it is not a great drama. This is what I think the Prime Minister thinks that Victoria needs, and I hope they listen to Hill.
And one of the challenges in Victoria, not dissimilar to Operation Sovereign Borders, and you mentioned the 16 people sitting around the table that all previously under the Gillard-Rudd government had some sort of role in stopping the boats, but everyone was engaged but not responsible for it. So, you know, they could hide under the table and pretend it wasn't their fault when things got tough. If you're the person in the hot seat, in the end the buck stops with you. You're a hell of a lot more invested in stopping the problem and fixing the problem than someone who might be able to buck pass it to someone else. In Victoria, there are a multitude of people involved in community tracing. They've got call centres and Qantas staff, they've got police, they've got health officials, but it seems like the buck doesn't stop really with anyone. That's the problem here, Jim. And not only haven't you got the structure, but you make a very good point. I can't see what the plan is. No one has confidence in the plan, and no one really has confidence, to be honest, in the ministers, because all of these things, this is not a second wave. This is the true first wave of community transmission. And there's the sense that things have started to get out of control. They didn't shut down the hotel quarantine fast enough. They're now at the point when you're getting 400s and high 300s every single day, and most of those cases we don't know where they come from, that people think it's almost beyond the capacity of government. Is this something that the military should take over now at this stage?
Well, it's awfully difficult because in our federation, the Premier is going to stay. He decides how it works. My advice would be that if he is satisfied that it's not working, he should take that as an option. Now, it will be a different situation than we faced, Peter, because it's a different. The nature of the problem is different. It's out there now. People are doing borders. People are doing checkpoints. People are doing tracing. People are doing quarantine. It's roared off in a different direction. You would need to corral it all to begin with. But you're quite right. You need a plan to begin with. You might remember that Scott Morrison used to say that we were co-authors. A number of us were co-authors of the strategy. We were laughed at by having a three-word policy, government policy, but it was brilliant because that policy was all we needed to get the strategy right and to work the strategy. Then we had a very direct way of working it, PM to Minister to the commander of the Joint Task Force. And that's where the implementation. Strategy is important, fabulously important, but 95% of the road to success is implementation. You know, are the people, the question that someone should have asked is, are the people who are quarantining, who are guarding the quarantine process, are they competent? Where is the risk points in this? Are the risk points on the borders? Are the risk points in Melbourne? Are the risk points in quarantine? All of this would have come out in the strategy if the person they choose to be the czar of this had have been through that process. They would know exactly what to do.
I've got to ask you then, on that point, I know the Prime Minister publicly and certainly privately made many offers of more ADF, Australian Defence Force support to Victoria, but they were routinely knocked back until about 10 days ago. Why do you think that was? Is there a turf war, do you think, between the police and the military? What was the reasoning, do you think, Jim?
I find that very, very difficult to understand, and I don't want to get too involved in the detail, but fixed governments, federal or state, are very capable of running a state through ministries if they've been doing it for 100 years. And we've all been doing this for 100 years, and at various levels of optimum performance, we govern countries and states. When you've got something very, very different, you need a different approach to this. This is something which goes across, I assume, almost every minister within the state government. And that was the reason that we pulled this back into a special organisation. That special organisation receives the expertise and the people and the authority from the ministries in the state, and then they get on with it. Now, of course, because this didn't happen beforehand, you've got to corral the problem. You've got to go through a transition from whatever is going on down there to a new way of doing things. And at this stage, it may be a good idea not to go to this because it may be so complex and mixed up at the moment. To transfer across might be an even bigger problem. But I don't know the details to make that decision.
I'm sort of hoping you've got some free time. You can borrow yourself away from the Senate and come down and help Victoria, Jim Molan, but I'm sure you'll say you're busy there in New South Wales. I was going to say the ACT, but you actually live in the New South Wales. Wish you were here, Jim Molan. Wish you were here. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Peter. I just need an invitation, that's all.
There you go, Daniel Andrews. Do not say you haven't been offered expert help. We'll leave it there, Jim Molan. Thank you.